The man first appeared as if the forest had spat him out silent. Sudden. And wrong. I had been alone for 3 days in the White Mountains of Alaska, surrounded only by pines, snow, and the ceaseless wind, when his shadow slid across the edge of my campfire. "Hey," he said, voice flat, almost rehearsed. "You know where the cabin is? The one people use to rest." I froze. He wasn't dressed like a hiker. No pack. No gear. Just a heavy coat stained dark around the cuffs. Boots that looked older than the snow on them. And a face that didn't belong this far into the wild. I told myself he was lost. That was the only reasonable answer. And so I forced a smile, though the unease curled cold in my stomach. "There's an old ranger cabin," I said cautiously, pointing east through the trees. "Couple miles out. Might be what you're looking for." He didn't thank me, didn't nod. He just stared at me for a moment longer than was normal, then melted back into the forest. The same way he had Aravid soundless, like the wilderness had swallowed him whole. I should have packed up and left that night. Every instinct screamed at me to go. But the rational part of meth part that clung to logic as if it were a lifeline told me I was being paranoid. This was Alaska. Strange encounters happened out here. People wandered off trails. Hunters passed through. Drifters sometimes appeared on the fringes. It didn't mean danger. But danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just sits in the shadows, waiting. By nightfall, the wind had picked up, whistling between the trees and carrying with it the scent of pine smoke from my fire. I was stirring a pot of instant soup when I heard the crunch of boots again. He was back. The same man. His coat darker now, damp from melted snow. His eyes small, glassy, animal-like, fixed on me with a steadiness that made my throat dry. "Couldn't find it," he said, voice a little sharper. "The cabin. You'll have to show me." I tried to laugh it off. "Man, it's easy. Straight through that pass. Maybe 2 miles. Just keep east." But he didn't move. Instead, he stepped closer to the fire, close enough that the glow lit his face. His features looked carved from stone-hard cheekbones, unshaven jaw, lips pressed too tightly together. He looked like a man who had forgotten how to smile. "You'll come with me," he said. Not a question. Command. That was when he pulled the knife. It wasn't some hunting blade. It was ugly, rust-stained, too long to be practical, too short to be ceremonial. A knife that belonged in back alleys, not in wilderness. My chest locked up. The air felt too heavy to breathe. I glanced at my pack by the log. My maps, my phone, my food all inside. But the way he held that knife, steady and unwavering, told me none of that mattered. "Now," he said. So I went. The walk to the cabin felt endless. Snow crunched beneath our boots. The trees loomed higher, their branches like skeletal arms clawing at the night sky. The moon spilled faint silver light across the drifts. But it wasn't enough to ease the dread sinking in my gut. He walked behind me, close enough that I could hear his breathing. Each inhale was slow, deliberate, as though he wanted me to know he wasn't tired. He was patient, strong, ready. I tried to speak. "Look, man, maybe we should wait until morning. Safer then. Easier to find." The knife nudged my back, sharp enough to tear through layers of fleece. My words died in my throat. We found the cabin a half-hour later. It stood crooked against the snow, timbers warped with age, roof sagging under the weight of ice. The door hung slightly open, as though it had been waiting. "Inside," he ordered. I hesitated at the threshold. The smell hit me first: mildew, rot, and something metallic that reminded me of rusted iron. Or blood. My heart slammed against my ribs. I said, "Inside." I stepped in. The cabin groaned under my weight. Floorboards brittle and soft. Moonlight pushed through cracks in the wall, striping the room with pale light. A broken chair sat in the corner. A cot leaned against the far wall, mold crawling up its fabric. And then I saw it, scratched into the wood. All across the walls were words, jagged, desperate scrawls. "Don't trust him. He waits. Run." I spun, but he was already there, filling the doorway, knife glinting in the moonlight. My body moved before my mind did. I hurled myself sideways, shoving the rotten chair at him, and bolted through the nearest gap in the wall. Wood splintered. Cold night air tore at my lungs. I didn't stop running until my legs burned and my breath came in ragged, stabbing bursts. I ran blind through the trees, stumbling, falling, pulling myself up again. I didn't care about direction. I just needed distance. When I finally stopped, I collapsed against a trunk, chest heaving, ears straining for pursuit. But there was nothing. No footsteps. No breath. Only the wind. I realized then I had left everything behind. My pack. My maps. My food. Even my knife. Everything that tethered me to survival was back at that cursed cabin. But I was alive. That had to count for something. It took me over an hour to navigate back toward my campsite. The fire was the landmark I prayed for, a beacon against the void. And when I saw the faint orange glow through the trees, relief nearly knocked me to my knees. But as I stepped into the clearing, my blood froze. My pack was there, not where I had left it by the log, not tossed aside in struggle. Sat neatly, unnaturally, in the middle of the fire pit itself, right above the embers, and sitting beside the flames, as if he had always belonged there, was the man, knife resting casually across his lap, eyes reflecting firelight like an animal's. And with slow, deliberate ease, he leaned forward, grabbed a log, and placed it onto the fire. The flames crackled, sparks rising into the night. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence said enough. I stumbled back, pulse hammering, every instinct screaming at me to run. So I did. Through the forest. Through the night. Branches tearing at my clothes. Snow filling my boots. Lungs burning with every breath. I didn't stop. Not once. Until the faint glow of dawn began to edge the horizon. When I finally found the ranger station, I was half delirious. Clothes frozen. Voice hoarse from shouting. I told them everything: the man, the cabin, the knife, the fire, the pack. They listened. Calm. Professional. One ranger scribbled notes while another called in a search. I sat wrapped in a blanket, shivering, convinced that at any moment he would walk through the door behind me. But when they led me back to the site, hours later, everything was gone. No fire pit. No ashes. No boot prints. No cabin in the woods. Not even the faintest trace that I had ever camped there. It was as if the forest itself had erased the entire night. The rangers tried to convince me that fear had twisted my memory. They said maybe I had wandered farther than I thought, that the cold and exhaustion had warped my senses. They told me wild animals could drag packs around, that shadows play tricks on the mind, that isolation out here can turn anyone paranoid. But I knew what I had seen. And more importantly, I knew what I had felt. The man was real. His knife was real. The cabin was real. I could still smell the mildew on its walls. Still hear the scrape of the blade against wood as he pushed me inside. Still see the words scrawled by desperate hands across every inch of the rotting timber. You don't imagine those details. You don't conjure that kind of terror out of thin air. I told them so. My voice cracked, raw from fear, but I begged them to listen, to take me back, to follow the trail east where I had pointed him. 2 rangers finally agreed. They strapped on snowshoes, loaded rifles, and told me to stay at the station where it was warm. But I couldn't stay. I couldn't sit still. Every nerve in my body screamed that if I wasn't with them, I would never see them again. So I followed. The forest looked different in daylight. The same trails where I had fled in panic seemed tame, almost inviting, beneath the weak Alaskan sun. Birdsong replaced the groan of night wind. Snow glittered instead of suffocating. But every time I blinked, I saw him again sitting by my fire, knife across his lap, watching with eyes that never blinked. When we reached the clearing where my camp had been, I felt the bottom drop out of my stomach. The rangers were right. It was gone. No fire pit. No ring of logs. No ash. Even the ground looked untouched, blanketed smooth with snow as if it had never been disturbed. I swore aloud. It was here. Right here. The younger ranger crouched, brushing a glove across the snow. He looked up, frowning. Not a single track. The older ranger, a grizzled man with crow's feet and a jaw like stone, studied me for a long moment. You said you were chased. But if you ran through here last night, we'd see it. The snow hasn't fallen since. My throat tightened. He was right. I had left a trail stumbling, crashing, desperate footprints leading away into the trees. But the snow before me lay pristine, untouched. Maybe the wind covered it. I muttered, though even I didn't believe the excuse. The older ranger didn't argue. He just studied me with eyes that said he'd seen this before, men cracking under isolation. Fear gnawing through reason until the wilderness itself became an enemy. Except I wasn't cracked. Not yet. I knew what I had seen. We pushed east toward where I remembered the cabin. My legs shook with each step, torn between praying we'd find it and praying we wouldn't. Because if we did, it meant the nightmare was real. The sun was sliding lower by the time we reached the ridge. Pines stretched endlessly on every side, their shadows long, blue, and cold. The wind sharpened. Clouds began to gather. Show us, the older ranger said. My pulse throbbed. I scanned the tree line, heart racing, certain the cabin would be there tilted, rotting, waiting. But there was nothing. No cabin. No structure. No scar of cleared earth where one might have stood. Just unbroken wilderness, as if the forest had never been touched by man. The younger ranger blew out a breath. Sir, I think what you saw was... Don't say it. I snapped. Voice breaking. Don't you dare say it was nothing. The older ranger touched his rifle. His voice was low, steady, measured. We'll stay out another hour. But if there's no sign, we turn back. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab him, drag him by the coat, and force him to see the words carved into the walls, the knife glinting in the dark. But I couldn't, because those things weren't here anymore. And that was worse than if they had been. That night I couldn't sleep. They gave me a bunk in the station, warm and safe, but my body refused rest. Every creak of timber sounded like a boot step. Every gust of wind like a breath at my ear. I lay staring at the ceiling, fighting to keep my eyes open because I knew what I would see if I closed them. The man, sitting by the fire, waiting. By morning, the rangers had stopped humoring me. They called me exhausted, hallucinating, unstable. They suggested arranging transport back to Fairbanks where I could rest, maybe talk to someone. But I didn't need rest. I needed proof. So while they busied themselves with radios and maps, I slipped out. The snow was brittle underfoot, air sharp enough to bite my lungs. But I walked east again, retracing the steps in daylight, because I couldn't let the wilderness convince me I was insane. The deeper I went, the quieter it grew. Even the birds seemed to fall silent. And then I saw it. Not the cabin. Not the man. But a tree. Its bark stripped. Its trunk scarred with words gouged deep into the wood. Run. The letters were jagged. Raw. Fresh enough that splinters curled from the edges. I stumbled back, heart hammering, breath frosting in the air. I wasn't crazy. Someone else had written this. Someone else had been out here. And maybe they were still out here. I turned, ready to sprint back to the station, when I saw movement between the pines. A figure, standing perfectly still, watching me. For one heartbeat I told myself it was a ranger, but the silhouette was wrong. Too tall, shoulders hunched forward, head cocked at a slight, unnatural angle. The knife glinted once in the pale sun. I didn't wait. I ran. Branches tore at my jacket. My lungs burned. But I didn't dare look back. Not until the outline of the station appeared through the trees. By the time I stumbled inside, gasping, the rangers were on their feet. What the hell happened? The older one barked. There he sat there. I wheezed, pointing toward the woods. I saw him. The man's knife. But when they stormed outside, rifles ready, the clearing was empty. No figure. No tracks. No proof. Only silence. They didn't trust me after that. Not fully. I could see it in their eyes. They kept their rifles closer. Their voices tighter. They whispered when they thought I couldn't hear. And that night, as the wind howled through the rafters, I understood the truth. The wilderness wasn't erasing him. He was erasing himself, covering his tracks, hiding his cabin, moving like a shadow through trees that obeyed his will. And he was patient. Patient enough to wait until I was alone again. The storm came on the third night. Snow hammered the station, rattling the windows, piling thick against the door. The rangers slept, exhausted from patrols. I lay awake, listening. And that was when I heard it. Not wind. Not snow. A knock. Slow. Deliberate. At the door, my blood turned to ice. I held my breath, praying it was just wood groaning under pressure. But then it came again, 3 sharp raps, steady and unnatural. I shook the younger ranger awake. He blinked, groggy. "Listen," I whispered. We both froze. The knock came again, this time softer, almost playful. The ranger swore under his breath, grabbing his rifle. The older one stirred too, rising with a curse, eyes blazing. But when they flung the door open, snow blasted and cold, empty, endless. No figure, no tracks, no sign of life, only darkness. And in the snow at our feet, carved deep by some unseen hand, were words. "Welcome back." The rangers argued about the message in the snow. The younger one wanted to call for backup immediately, but the older ranger dismissed it as some prank. Maybe hunters trying to scare us. His calm voice carried authority, but I could see the tightness in his jaw. He didn't believe his own words, because no hunter in his right mind would be this far out in the storm, carving taunts into the snow outside a ranger station. I didn't sleep that night. None of us did. We took turns watching the door, rifles across our laps, eyes darting at every creak and groan of the wind. But dawn came without another knock, and when we stepped outside, the message in the snow had vanished beneath a fresh blanket, erased, as if it had never existed. The younger ranger, his name was Porter, started questioning me in detail. What exactly had I seen? What did the man look like? How far had I run? I gave him everything, the coat with dark stains, the boots, the glassy animal eyes, the knife, the cabin with words carved into the walls. But when I spoke, I could hear how unbelievable it sounded. A cabin that appeared and vanished. A fire pit erased overnight. Warnings etched into trees that no longer bore marks when others looked. A man who left no tracks in snow. It sounded insane. Yet the fear inside me was real. That evening, Porter made a suggestion. We should take him out again. Retrace the area. Maybe if he shows us where. The older ranger Hawthorne cut him off sharply. No. We're not chasing ghost stories. Our job is to keep the station safe. The storm hasn't lifted, and I'm not risking men for shadows. I wanted to protest, but Hawthorne's glare pinned me silent. That night, the storm deepened. Snow beat against the roof like fists. The temperature plunged. The fire inside the stove glowed orange, the only thing keeping the cold from swallowing us whole. And then, sometime after midnight, I smelled it. Smoke. Not from our stove. From outside. I rushed to the window, heart pounding. Through the swirl of snow I saw it, a faint orange glow deep among the trees. A fire. My fire. Right where my camp had been. I shouted for the rangers, pointing into the blizzard. Porter leaned close, squinting, and his face drained of color. Christ, there's something burning out there. But Hawthorne shook his head. Could be lightning strike on a tree. Could be anything. Stay inside. It's him. I whispered. He's back. He's waiting. And though I begged, they refused to go out. By morning the glow was gone. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed proof, something I could hold in my hands. Something that would keep me from questioning my own sanity. So when the rangers argued over maps at the table, I slipped out again, The cold hit like a wall. Snow clung to my boots, my breath freezing in my beard. But I pressed eastward, toward where the glow had been. I found it. The fire pit. Ashes still warm beneath the snow. And in the center, blackened but unmistakable, was my pack. I stared at it, throat tight, knees weak. The straps were charred, the fabric curled with heat, but it was mine. Proof. I reached down then froze, because beside the ashes, pressed carefully into the snow, was a single handprint, too large to be mine, fingers long, spread unnaturally wide. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat, and when I lifted my head, I saw him, standing between the trees, closer this time, watching me. His coat hung open, revealing a chest streaked with something dark, blood, or dirt, or both. His face was pale, lips curled in something between a sneer and a smile. And in his hand, the knife. My legs moved before my mind. I turned and ran, snow spraying behind me. The forest blurred. My lungs burned. I didn't look back until the station loomed through the trees. I slammed through the door, gasping. Porter jumped up. What happened? He's out there. I cried. I saw him. The fire, the pack, it was all there. But when they went with me hours later, there was nothing. No ashes. No pack. No handprint. The snow lay smooth, untouched. Porter started believing me. I could see it in his eyes. He didn't say it aloud, not with Hawthorne listening, but there was fear in him now. Fear that mirrored mine. That night, when Hawthorne dozed in his chair, Porter whispered across the room, "What if it's not a man?" I stared at him, too afraid to answer. The days blurred after that. Snowstorm followed snowstorm, trapping us inside. Supplies dwindled. Radios cracked with static. The forest pressed in closer with every passing hour. And then, on the fifth night, the knocking returned. Not at the door. At the window. Soft. Measured. Fingers tapping the glass as though testing its strength. Couldn't move. Neither could Porter. We just stared at the frosted pane, praying the sound would stop. It didn't. The tapping grew louder, harder, until the glass rattled in its frame. Hawthorne stormed over, yanked the curtains aside, and there was nothing, just darkness. But when I dared look closer, I saw it, faint smears on the glass. Finger streaks. Too many fingers. Hawthorne cursed, pulled the curtains shut, and ordered us back to bed. But I couldn't sleep. I sat awake, clutching a knife from the kitchen, heart thundering at every sound. Near dawn, I drifted. My eyelids drooped. And that's when I heard it. Breathing. Not mine. Not Porter's. Not Hawthorne's. From inside the room. I jerked upright. Knife raised. The breathing stopped instantly, as though silenced on command. But in the dim glow of the stove, I saw something on the floor. Wet footprints. Leading from the door. Stopping right beside my bunk. I shook Porter awake, but by the time he looked, the floor was clean, dry. No footprints. No proof. By the sixth day, Porter was unraveling. He paced the cabin, muttering under his breath, clutching his rifle too tightly. Hawthorne barked at him to calm down, but his own hands trembled when he thought we weren't watching. The wilderness was breaking us. Or maybe the man was, because that night, I saw him again, through the cracks in the curtains, standing just beyond the tree line, motionless, watching, and though snow whipped around him, though the wind howled, he didn't move, didn't shiver, didn't blink, just stood, waiting. When I turned back to wake Porter, I made the mistake of blinking, and when I looked again, the space was empty. But the knife was on the porch. The Rangers argued bitterly after finding the words in the snow. Porter, younger, his face pale beneath the frostbite on his cheeks, wanted to call for backup immediately. We can't ignore this anymore, he insisted, voice shaking. Someone is out there. Someone dangerous. But Hawthorne only stood at the window, staring into the storm like the trees themselves were listening. Or, he said coldly, we've got a man here, he jabbed a thumb at me, who's losing his grip. Wilderness can do that. Seen it happen before. His dismissive tone stung. I wanted to scream, to demand he believe me. But part of me wondered if that's exactly what the thing out there wanted. For us to turn on each other. The storm hammered us all night. The walls moaned under the weight of snow. The roof groaned like it would cave in. None of us slept. We sat in silence, rifles near, eyes darting to the door each time the wind shifted. I could almost hear laughter in the gale, though maybe it was just in my head. By dawn, the message in the snow had vanished, erased beneath fresh powder. If Porter hadn't seen it too, I would have started to doubt my own eyes. But I knew. The man was real, and he was playing with us. The day passed with no sign of him. Hawthorne buried himself in work, checking radios, scribbling notes in the logbook, pretending routine still existed. Porter kept glancing at me like he wanted to say something but was afraid Hawthorne would hear. That evening, when Hawthorne stepped outside to chop wood, Porter leaned in close. His whisper was sharp, desperate. I believe you. The words hit me like a lifeline. He's out there, Porter continued. And it's not normal. He leaves nothing behind. No tracks. No proof. I don't think we're dealing with just a man. His eyes darted to the window, where shadows swayed between trees. What if it's something older? Something this wilderness hides? I wanted to deny it. But the truth was, I had felt it too. That wrongness in the air. That weight pressing down every time I thought I was alone. That night, the smell of smoke woke me. Not from our stove, this was sharper. Acrid. Foreign. I rushed to the window, pressing my face to the cold glass. Through the veil of snow I saw it, an orange glow flickering between the trees. A fire. My fire. I shouted, rousing Porter and Hawthorne. Porter scrambled to the window, his breath fogging the glass, and his voice cracked. Jesus Christ. There's something out there. But Hawthorne's jaw clenched. Could be lightning. Could be another camper. In this storm. Porter snapped. There's no one else for 50 miles. Hawthorne didn't answer. His silence was louder than denial. I didn't wait. I threw on my coat and bolted outside, ignoring their shouts behind me. The snow stung my eyes, but the glow guided me, a beacon I hated yet couldn't ignore. I found it, The fire pit. Ashes still warm. Smoke curling lazily into the air. And in the center of the burned wood was my pack shard. Melted at the edges, but undeniably mine. My heart seized. Proof. Finally. Proof I wasn't insane. I knelt, reaching for it and froze. Beside the fire, pressed deep into the snow, was a handprint. Too big. Fingers long. Stretched unnaturally wide. Each groove carved with impossible precision, as if something heavier than flesh had pressed down. I staggered back, while burning my throat. My breath came fast. Too fast. Clouding the air in frantic bursts. And then I felt its eyes. Watching. I turned. And there he was. The man. Standing between the pines. Motionless. His coat hung open, revealing a chest streaked with something dark and frozen. His face was ghostly pale, lips pressed tight, and his eyes, God, his eyes were pits of glassy darkness. The knife glinted once in the faint light. I ran. Branches whipped my face. My lungs screamed. My legs burned. I didn't look back until the station appeared through the trees like salvation. I crashed through the door, shouting, "He's out there." I saw him. The fire, the pack, it was all there. The rangers scrambled. Porter pale as bone. Hawthorne grabbing his rifle. They forced me to lead them back. But when we arrived, everything was gone. No fire pit. No ashes. No pack. No handprint. The snow lay smooth, untouched. That night, the storm deepened. Wind howled like a living thing, rattling the shutters. We huddled inside, exhausted, strung tight as wires ready to snap. The first knock came after midnight. 3 slow raps at the door. We froze. The sound came again. Louder. Hawthorne swore, rifle in hand, and yanked the door open. Nothing. Just snow. Black trees. Howling wind. But carved into the drift at our feet, deep and deliberate, were words. Welcome back. The days blurred into one another after that. The storm never ceased. Food dwindled. Radios sputtered and died. Porter muttered constantly under his breath, his eyes darting at every shadow. Hawthorne tried to hold authority, but his hands trembled when he thought we weren't looking. And me, I stopped trying to convince them, because the thing out there wasn't something words could explain. It wanted us broken. And it was winning. The 5th night was worse. This time, the knocks came at the window, soft at first, like fingertips brushing the glass. Then harder, louder, until the glass rattled in its frame. Hawthorne stormed over, yanked the curtains wide. Nothing. Just darkness and snow. But on the glass, smeared faintly in frost, were finger streaks. Too many fingers. We sat in silence until dawn, rifles gripped tight, no one daring to sleep. But the forest didn't need sleep. And near morning, when exhaustion finally dragged me into a shallow doze, I woke to something worse than knocking. Breathing. Not mine. Not Porter's. Not Hawthorne's. It came from the corner of the room. Low. Slow. Inhale. Exhale. I sat frozen, knife clutched in shaking hands. The breathing stopped instantly, as though silenced by my awareness. And then I saw it. Wet footprints on the floorboards. Leading from the door. stopping right beside my bunk. By the 6th day, Porter was unraveling. He paced the station with wild eyes, muttering about how we'd never make it out. Hawthorne snapped at him, but his own voice cracked with strain. The wilderness had stripped away every illusion of safety. That night, I saw the man again, through a gap in the curtains, standing beyond the tree line, motionless, watching. Snow whipped around him, but he didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't breathe, just stood, waiting. When I turned back to wake Porter, I blinked, and when I looked again, he was gone. But on the porch, lying in the snow, was the knife. Terror rooted me where I stood. The blade gleamed dully, crusted with rust and something darker. Porter stared at it with wide eyes, then at me. "He wants you to take it," Porter whispered. I shook my head, bile rising. Hawthorne stepped forward, fury masking fear. He bent, lifted the knife, turned it over in his hands. "It's just a piece of junk," he growled. But as he said it, the cabin creaked, like something shifting inside the walls, something listening. The storm raged harder, as if nature itself wanted to bury the memory of what had happened. My legs carried me forward, though every muscle screamed with exhaustion. The snow lashed at my face, freezing tears into ice before they could even fall. But I did not stop. The image of the man calmly feeding the fire while my backpack sat in the flames haunted me with every step. His eyes, his quiet, patient smile. That was not the face of a man caught in violence. That was the face of someone who knew I could never escape. Hours later, or maybe it was minutes, I could not tell, he stumbled into a ranger station. The wooden cabin appeared like a miracle in the white blur of the storm. Lights glowed faintly in the windows. My knees buckled as I slammed against the door, shouting for help. The door opened, and a ranger pulled me inside, his face etched with shock at my frozen state. My words tumbled out between sobs and gasps. The stranger, the knife, the cabin, the fire, the backpack placed deliberately in the flames. The ranger's expression shifted from alarm to confusion to something I couldn't read. He nodded gravely, promised they would investigate, and radioed for backup. Within an hour, several rangers and 2 state troopers escorted me back toward the site. My heart hammered. I wanted them to see, to know I wasn't mad. I wanted someone to share the weight of this horror. But as dawn broke and we reached the clearing where my camp had been, the world mocked me. There was nothing. No fire pit. No ashes. No half-burnt wood. No gear. Not even footprints in the snow. It was as though the forest had swallowed every trace of my existence there. I screamed, pointing, desperate, swearing I had been right here. My throat burned with cold air and frustration. The rangers searched in widening circles. They looked for depressions in the snow, remnants of fire, anything. But there was nothing. One trooper rested a hand on my shoulder, his voice calm but firm. "You've been through something traumatic. Sometimes the mind." "No." I cut him off, my voice breaking. "He was here. He's still here. I saw him. He put my backpack in the fire. He was waiting for me." The other trooper exchanged a look with the ranger. That look, the quiet dismissal, the silent agreement, was almost worse than the cabin itself. They thought I was losing my mind. But then, one of the rangers called out. He had found something, half buried in the snow 100 feet from the site. I ran toward him. My blood froze colder than the wind when I saw it. A single glove. My glove. The one I had dropped when I fled. My lungs locked. I looked around, wild-eyed, as if he might step from behind the trees any second. The rangers noticed my panic. But still, they seemed unconvinced. Could have been carried by the wind. One muttered. I wanted to shake them, scream until they understood. But their skepticism was ironclad. The troopers insisted I return with them to Fairbanks to file a report, then suggested I rest. They chalked it up to stress, fatigue, maybe even hallucinations brought on by the cold. But I knew better. That night, safe inside a motel room, I stared at the ceiling while the radiator clanged. My body lay in warmth, but my soul felt buried in frost. Sleep finally dragged me under like a heavy tide. I woke in the dark hours of early morning to the crackle of fire. My eyes snapped open. Across the room, where the radiator sat, I saw me backpack, sitting upright, neatly placed, a wisp of smoke curling from its seams. The scream caught in my throat. I lunged for the lamp, but the room was empty when light filled it. The backpack was gone. Only my suitcase sat in the corner. My hands shook as I pressed them to my face. Was I unraveling? Or was he here, in this very building, watching me? The next day, I begged the police to search again. They humored me, but nothing turned up. No cabin. No tracks. They told me many old hunting shacks and trapper cabins dotted the mountains. Most abandoned for decades, rotting into the earth. Maybe I had stumbled into one. Maybe the man I saw was just a drifter. But their voices carried that tone. The tone you use on someone you don't quite believe. Weeks passed. I returned home, trying to slip back into normal life. But Alaska lingered in me like frostbite. Nights were worst. I dreamed of the cabin, of the fire, of his face glowing orange in the flames. I dreamed of the way he sat patient, calm, waiting. And then the dreams began to bleed into waking life. I would find my boots shifted near the door, a knife resting on the counter that I didn't remember leaving out. The faint smell of smoke lingering in my apartment with no source. Once, I came home to find the heater turned up high, the air stifling, as though the room wanted to mimic a fire. I stopped sleeping, stopped eating. My friends noticed, but what could I say? That a stranger in Alaska had followed me home without ever stepping through the door. That he had imprinted himself onto my life like a scar. One evening, I finally broke. I called the ranger station in Alaska, desperate for a voice from that frozen land. Desperate to hear that someone else had seen him. The voice on the other end was quiet for a long time after I explained. Then the ranger sighed. "You're not the first," he said. "Every few years, we get reports like yours. Always near the White Mountains. Always a cabin that isn't there when we look. Always a man with a knife." My chest caved inward. Who is he? No one knows, the ranger said. Some think he's a drifter who froze out there decades ago, stuck between worlds. Others say he's a trapper who killed travelers for their supplies. But every story ends the same. Someone meets him. Someone runs. And when we go to check, nothing remains. The line crackled. Be careful. They say once you've seen him, he doesn't forget. I hung up, my hands trembling so hard I could barely place the phone back in its cradle. That night, as I lay in bed, every shadow felt like a presence. The hum of the heater became the hiss of firewood. My reflection in the dark window almost seemed to smile back at me with a face that wasn't mine. Sleep came like a thief. When I woke, the room was filled with the smell of smoke. At the foot of my bed, in the faint red glow of the heater, sat my backpack, upright, waiting, and in the corner chair, cloaked in shadow, I saw him, the man from the forest, knife glinting in his hand. His voice was calm, almost kind. "You left me waiting," he whispered. I screamed, but no one heard.